In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this little Roman blind. This is for a window that's got a wooden window frame. If you have a UPVC you may need to button this to the side of the window recess instead of to the frame. There's only a small blind, but there again you can easily adapt this if you've got a larger window. So the first thing we need to do is to measure at the window, and then I'll show you how I made it. First I need to measure the size of my window. I'm going to fit my blind into the recess of the window and screw the button straight into the wooden frame, and it is a wooden framed window. You wouldn't do this method if you've got a UPVC window frame. So the width of my blind is going to go from one side of the wooden frame to the other side, and mine's just over 22 inches, so I'm going to make my blind to exactly 22 inches. And then again the height, so from where you want the blind to sit right at the top of the window all the way down to the bottom, and mine measures 39 inches. So those are the numbers that I need to keep in my mind. The wooden button will go straight across the top of the window, and I've just cut a piece of wood which is around about 1.5 inches by 1/4 inch, which is perfect thickness, and that's going to disappear into the window frame. You won't see that. So I'll drill into that in just a second. And then just down the right hand side of my window, because I've chosen the right, you could choose the left if you wanted to, I put my cleat, and that's what I'm going to wrap the blind cord around. So the next thing to do is to drill my piece of wood and cut my fabric. Now I've cut my piece of wood to exactly the size of the top of the window frame, so that's 22 inches for my window, and I've just made a couple of screw holes so that I can attach that to the window. Next thing I need to do, just to prep this, is either end, around about 1/4 inch in, I'm just going to screw a couple of eye hooks in there, and that's what I'm going to thread. I'm going to thread my cord through there, Alfie, so I've got to do that. That's what I'm going to thread the cord through. So one of those just screwed into either end. I did use a brad awl to make the holes first, just to make that a little bit easier for screwing the eye hooks in, like so. Then I'm going to put the loop side of the Velcro on the back of it, and just to make doubly sure that it's going to stick, I'm going to use a strip of double-sided tape. It doesn't matter if I go over those screw holes, because the screws, when I do attach this, will go straight through both the Velcro and the double-sided tape. So just peel the backing off this. You could glue it if you don't have double-sided tape, but it's just a little bit quicker if you do. And again I'm going to put the loop side straight over the top, and this is how the blind is going to actually be attached to the button. And this is just a piece of plywood that I'm using. It's about 1/4 inch thick by about 1.5 inches long. So it's substantial enough to be able to hold the blind and take the pulling of the blind, but without being too bulky in the window. What I'm also going to do, because if you do take the blind up and down, you're going to be pulling against this. So I'm just going to put a few staples just across the top to secure it. Okay, so that's that out of the way. Put that to one side. Now this is my lining fabric. I'm just using lining cotton. It might be quite nice if you're going to see this from the outside of a window, maybe it's a downstairs window, to use the same fabric as your outer fabric, but of course that depends on your budget and how much fabric you can afford. Are you going? Nice, off you go. The lining fabric needs to be cut to exactly the size that you need the blind. So my window, if you remember, measured 22 inches across, and it's 39 inches down. So where are you going? So that's exactly the size that I want my lining fabric. So I'll just pop that to one side. My outer fabric, so this is the outside of the blind. I've already pressed this, but I'll explain what I've done. Again, I need it exactly the same size as the window, but then extra, because I'm going to fold this over and make the hems. So I've actually made mine 7 inches longer than my 39 inches and 4 inches wider. What I've then done is folded over twice, so I've made a double hem and pressed all the way around. So eventually, when all of this is pressed and folded upwards and pressed inwards and folded over twice so you get a nice neat edge, this now measures 22 inches across by 39 inches, or of course the size that you want your window to be. Make sure everything's square. Use your set squares for both the lining and the outside if you have them. It's really important to prep and make sure that you cut right, you fold right, and just obviously sew right, so that the blind hangs perfectly square in your window, because it will look odd if it doesn't fit perfectly. Now remember, I put the Velcro on one side of my batten to hang this up. I'm going to put the second side of my Velcro, so this is the fluffy side, onto the outside of my fabric, and I'm going to do that first of all because I don't want to see the stitches from the outside. So this is the top end of my fabric. I'm just going to open that up. Let's turn that over. And where the crease marks were, so I've got kind of one fold and then two folds, I want my Velcro to go straight across the middle fold just here. Oh, just dropped it. So that's going to be sewn across there, straight across the middle. I'll just pin that in place first of all. That's so straight across the middle towards the top of the fold. So this is going to sit when it's in the window, straight across the top of the window. So pin and then sew. Making sure that's nice and straight. You won't see this from the other side, but make sure that's as straight as you can. I'll just snip that off at the end. Ow. And then I'm going to carefully sew all the way around all four sides of my Velcro. So there you go, that's stitched onto the top. So next thing I'm going to do is to lay out the fabric, fold back the bits that I've folded over and creased, and then lay my lining fabric inside, making sure it sits perfectly, neatly and flat, and that just goes up to those lines that I've pressed, and they should sit perfectly. So, important that it lays flat, and this again is all in the prep. And then we'll fold back over so the outside of the blind comes back over the back, and you can see how that makes it look really nice and neat. And pin all the way around. When I come up to the top section where the Velcro was, I fold that over twice, making sure that's flat, and then just in the corner I'm going to make a mitre. Just because I think it looks nice and nice. And then I'm going to carry on and pin all the way around again. And then I'm going to hand sew, so tuck in the corners again. Do make sure you put plenty of pins in there because we do need this to lay flat. And then back down the final side. And across the hemline, nice and flat. And the same at the bottom as at the top, so fold over twice, fold in the corner to make a nice neat mitre. And what that does, not only just looks nice and neat from the back, but if you didn't mitre the corner over, then you kind of get two edges where the hem's folded up. So from the front of the blind, you don't see the hem of the blind, if that makes sense. Okay, last few pins. And then I'm going to hand sew all the way around, and the reason being, I don't want to see any stitches on the outside of my blind. So it doesn't really matter where you start, and I'm just going to slip stitch. So a couple of stitches to secure first of all, tuck in the thread, and then you'll need to take your needle into the lining by about 1/4 inch, back out, and just tuck it under the edge of the fold. Keep your stitches as small as you possibly can, and you can actually feel, particularly if you put your finger underneath, if you go all the way through to the outside of your fabric, and we don't want that to happen. I don't mind it catching the outside of the fabric, and it's quite good with a curtain weight fabric like this. It just enables you to do that without seeing it on the outside, so that when I turn my stitching over I don't see anything for the stitches on the outside of the fabric. On a smaller blind like this, it's well worth doing. It's well worth taking the time. I happen to like hand sewing. I could spend a long time doing this and getting it perfect. I find it really satisfying. If you've got a larger blind, then maybe you want to machine sew that. Just make sure that your stitches are kept straight, because you will see those from the outside, and use the same colour thread as the rest of your fabric. But again, once you get used to this, it's actually quicker than you'd expect. However, you don't want to sit and watch me sew all the way around, because it may take 20 minutes or so. So I'll just finish this off and I'll see you in a sec. So the next stage after hand sewing all the way around is to decide where I'm going to put the positions of my rods. The rods that I'm using are blind rods. They're metal and they're quite fine. And I want them to sit, I'm only using 2 because I think that's enough on a blind of this size, but I don't want to sit them in thirds. I want them to be moved down a little bit so the bottom end of my fabric isn't quite as big as the folds, because that's the bit that just hangs on its own. So I'm going to position my rods 16 inches from the top, which is that, 16 inches from that one, and then that leaves me just under 8 inches at the bottom. Now obviously you make sure that these are square. To be honest, it doesn't matter if they're half an inch out or so, or if you find it easier, if it's the first time you made a blind, just to put that into thirds. It really doesn't matter at all. And I'm going to mark across here, and I'm going to put my rods inside rod tape, which is this. Now I know with some blinds you can make folds and boxes inside the lining to house the rods, which again, it's mathematical, it's not as easy as this. This is a tape that's been specifically designed to go with the rods, and it's already got loops on it for you to put your little hooks through for when you start threading it. I'll show you that in a second. Now I know when I machine stitch this on, you will see the stitches on the reverse side when the blind's down, but you won't see that when the blind is up, because they'll disappear into the folds. So I'm literally drawing a line just with a pencil, because the tape's going to be over the top of this, across squarely both of the sides, both of the marks where I'm going to put my rods. And then I'll cut my tape down to size. I'm cutting that a little bit longer than the width of the blind because I'm going to fold over the ends. Fold over to make that neat, and then pin across the pencil mark, and then I'll machine sew both of those. When you do sew them on, make sure that you sew very, very close to the edge as you can. If you sew too close to the centre, then you're just not going to get your rod down the centre. So that goes on there. Do these both at the same time. If you don't have the specific tape, or if you can't get hold of that, you could just use a piece of buyer's tape or a piece of ribbon, would work just as well. But instead of having the loops that are already integrated into the tape as this does, you'll need to hand sew your hooks on. But we'll come to that in a second. No. Okay, so I'll just go off and sew that. So again, quite close to the edge with a small straight stitch. Always go backwards and forwards a few times at the end, because there may be a little bit of pressure from the rods when you feed them through. We don't want that coming undone. And off we go. I haven't sewn or folded over the other end of the tape at the moment, because it may move a little bit as you're sewing, that's all. So when I come down to the second edge, that's where I'm going to just trim that back a little bit and then fold over. A bit more. And remember not to sew across the end, otherwise you won't get your bowl in. go down the other side. If you've got a longer blind, you may find it easier to start rolling the blind up now as it goes underneath the machine. Keep it nice and flat. Make sure that the lining's not puckering up as it goes under. And keep your lines straight, because when the blind's down you will see this from the other side. So that's what we're looking at, come here, from the right hand side, and I'll just do the same with the other one now. So pop your rod through those strips, like so. So both of those are threaded. Next thing to do is put the loops on. Now the beauty of having this tape with the loops already on is that when you get your hooks, you simply twist them and pop them onto the loop. If you haven't got this tape, then you'll be using ribbon or bias binding. You'll have to hand sew your hooks on. And they don't have to be these hooks in that case that thread on. You could just use little curtain rings. Okay, so those 4 are on. And then we're going to start threading it up. Now have a think about which side of your window your cleat is going to go, so therefore which side you want the weight to go. Mine is going to be on the right hand side of my window, in which case, because I'm threading this the other way around, I need to thread towards the left of my window. So you'll need 2 pieces of cord in this case. If you've got a very wide window, you may need to put another support in the centre of the cord, in which case just follow exactly what I'm doing but do it again in the middle. So my first cord, I just tie this onto the first side. I'll cut back all of the longer bits later on. It's better to have your cord too long than too short. So I'll tie it onto one end. I'm going to go through the second loop, and then at the top of my blind, this is where my button's going to go. I'm laying this next to the Velcro, 2 Velcro sides together. And go through that hook and across to the other side, and then leave this to dangle. That should be long enough now to go down the other side of the blind, but I'll leave that to one side. Then I'll do the same again with this side of the blind. So make a good secure knot on the bottom loop. Through the next loop, then up to the same hook on the button at the top and thread through there. Like so. And then just for now I'm going to tie a loose knot in the end of those 2 just so that they don't come undone, and then we'll take that over to the window and get it fitted. Okay, now so take back your blind away from the button. And remember I made 2 holes in the button and then put Velcro straight over the top of them. So what I've done is to poke through the screws from the back so I can see from the front where I'm going to actually attach that to the window. So I'll offer that up to the window frame, and then take my screws and pop this all back in again. So, then I'll take my blinds, make sure the cord's out of the way when you pop this back up, and I'm going to stretch that from one side of my button across to the other so it's nice and taut, and press it down in place. And then we'll put the weight onto the cord. So I've already loosely knotted that at the back. Where have you gone? There we go. So I'll just draw that up. You can see how the blind folds really nicely, just those 2 pleats look really good. So keeping the 2 pieces of cord to the same length, I'll chop off the knot that I popped in there earlier on, and put the weight onto the end. So I'll feed that into the end of the weight, pull it through, making sure they're still both the same length, and then tie a nice big fat knot into the end of there so it doesn't pull through. So chop off the end of the cords and pull that into the weight so you don't see them, and then when I pull my blind up I can just tie that around that cleat at the side of the wall there to hold it in place. There you go. Now this is my lining fabric. I'm just using, it's, oh dear.